My name is Rosemarie Geraghty, and I'm a part-time local history researcher attached to Untitled Heritage Centre in Ockley and Blacksod, County Mayo. I've lived in Blacksod for over 40 years. My dad was from Achill, and naturally, I have great fondness for Blacksod and Achill. I would also have strong family connections with Cleveland, Ohio, and Holyoke, Massachusetts, also Wisconsin. Why did I start this quest, and how did it all come about? The real motivation for the project was seeing an article in the Irish Times dated March 31st, 1883. The following is an extract by an Irish Times reporter who walked with the emigrants. Breakfast was supplied by the committee to the emigrants, and before 6 o'clock, the road, 5 miles in length, extending between Belmullet and Barna, the place of embarkation, was filled with the departing people formed of old and young. The long procession wended its way seawards, some walking and bending beneath the weight of huge bundles containing the entire property of the family, while others rode slowly forward in carts, the father leading the horse and the mother and children and baggage occupying the vehicle. For hours this scene continued with few intervals, and it goes on to say, in the distance rose the 3 masts and hull of the NESTORIAN. Near ashore lay the Seahorse, its decks already crowded with men, women, and children. Across the blue water of the bay, the rowboats, filled with their living freight, swiftly glided, and upon the sands of the shore stood the remaining emigrants, while all around were visible the lofty, rugged mountains of Mayo, their snow-clad heights glistening in the sunlight. The departing people were the families of our Erris and Achill communities of County Mayo, leaving from Ely Bay, for many their very own doorstep. These scenes were unfolding just a few miles down the road from the Heritage Centre, at a place I would pass on almost a daily basis, yet there was no present-day mention of it. This led to finding out more about James Hack-Tuke, which Gerard has covered in great detail already. As a member of the Erris community, I asked myself, what about the families and how did they fare? I wanted to find out more, so the research began. Blacksod Bay emigration, re-establishing a bond. The springtime of 1883 and 1884, over 3,300 people, families of Erris, Achill and Newport West, County Mayo, emigrated on 15 sailings directly from Blacksod Bay to the US and Canada. These families, often called Ireland's forgotten emigrants, were part of our community. Where did the departing families leave from? They left from a small corner of northwest Mayo called Erris, which covers 360 square miles, as well as Achill Island and Newport West, also the offshore islands of Inishkea, Inishglora and Inishbiggle. The families were rowed out in small boats from Barna, Ely Bay, an inlet of Blacksod Bay, to the Navy ship, which ran up alongside the ocean steamer, anchored in the deeper waters of the bay. The Achill families arrived at the ship in hookers, towed by a larger vessel. The journey would usually take 12 to 14 days. The ocean steamers were the reputable steamships of the Allen Line of Glasgow, not the coffin ships of a former era. The families of Clifton and Uachtarard, assisted by the Tuke Fund, joined the ship in Galway. Untitled Heritage Centre, as mentioned, is situated near where the people embarked on the ships. The families were part of our community. I personally found it very moving to think of all the families leaving and nothing to remember them by. We wanted to reach out to their descendants and give them a focal point previously non-existent. It was important to connect descendants with the land of their forebears, to discover and embrace their Irish heritage and culture, and re-establish a bond once again. The research began in 2008. Unfortunately, as a small community-based, not-for-profit centre, we had very few resources. We didn't even have the luxury of the now freely available civil and parish church records. FamilySearch.org was very helpful. We did, however, buy a copy of Mr. Tuke's Fund for Assisted Emigration, which is now also freely available online. The assisted emigration was so well structured and documented by Mr. Tuke's Fund. This report acted like a compass and led the way. Mr. Tuke's Fund. Disposal of holdings for Mullet, Ackle and Newport districts stated heads of households for 1883, although none for 1884. Many general destinations were also stated in the Tuke report, not individual family destinations. Most importantly, the dates of the ships leaving Blacksod were recorded. Blacksod Bay was not an official stop on the Glasgow to Boston or Quebec route. The ships of the Allen Line were requested to call at Blacksod by the Tuke Committee. Descendants found it difficult to locate their ancestors' journey from Ireland. An opportunity had arisen through the assisted emigration scheme for a family to all travel together, and many descendants were unaware of this. After much detailed searching, the manifests of the 15 sailings were eventually gathered and transcribed to the best of my ability. This took a huge amount of time, but seeing the words Blacksod Bay written on a manifest made it all worthwhile. Unbelievably and overwhelmingly, here were the families of our community: Barretts, Corleys, Gorhans, Geraghty's, Kilbans, Graylish, just names on a manifest page, but so much more than that. I would have seen posts from the diaspora looking for information on the internet as to where their ancestors came from in County Mayo and not finding any answers. They often wondered how an entire family could afford the passage to all travel together to America or Canada. So with the help of the manifests, Mr. Tuke's fund and some local knowledge, messages were sent and connections were made with descendants. The feedback from those descendants was just so inspiring, motivating, and very humbling. This was their story waiting to be told. Mr. Tuke's fund was their family story unfolding. The research continued and we had a small exhibition at the Heritage Centre in 2008. Fast forward to 2013, then came a boost to the research that made such a difference. 2013 was going to be Ireland's official year of the gathering, a year to connect with the diaspora. The Gathering 2013 was a tourism-led initiative in Ireland. It aimed to mobilise the Irish diaspora to return to Ireland during 2013 to be part of specially organised local gatherings and events during the year. Coincidentally, 2013 also marked the 130th anniversary of the first sailings from Blacksod Bay, a great opportunity to connect with our diaspora. On the strength of the research carried out over many years, the management and committee of the Heritage Centre were fortunate to source and receive partial funding towards the building of our specially commissioned Blacksod Bay immigration website to collate and relay the information gathered in an easy-to-view format to connect with our diaspora. It was important that this website be free to view. This was a way of giving something back. Our aim was to re-establish a bond with as many descendants as possible. Blacksod Bay immigration website. In June 2013, we launched our main Blacksod Bay immigration website at an event in the Heritage Centre. Gerard Moran was with us that day. Finally, we had our much needed focal point where descendants could search for their ancestors and add information regarding their families if they wished. Some added a great deal of information, helping other descendants discover their family connections. We also added a latest news descendants WordPress site. The Blacksod Bay immigration website comprises of names transcribed from copies of the original ship's manifests. These are the names documented on leaving Ireland. With local knowledge, variations of surnames are apparent and can be understood and are added to the website. As mentioned earlier, the Mayo townlands for 1884 were not stated in Mr. Tuke's fund, so they were researched and they continue to be added to the website. As family groups, the records would be more accurate for locating a townland. Because of the funding, we were able to subscribe to Ancestry.com. Messages were sent to descendants on public member trees to help them connect, about 160 messages. Where did the families leave from? Mostly the Midwestern states of the US and Canada, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Montana, Iowa, Rhode Island and Connecticut, also Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey. And what became of them? As there is no surviving complete census of Ireland until 1901, the manifests, in effect, act as a mini census for the families of Eris and Achill at that time in history. The 1885 Minnesota State Census was invaluable, as only 1 or 2 years had passed. The families destined for Minnesota were there. Many families settled in Minnesota. Simon McNeela and Pat Cawley families from Mullet on board SS Nestorian, mentioned in one of the letters home to the Tute Committee, were indeed in Lansing, Mower County, Minnesota, working on the railroad. The families emigrated in 1883 and 1884, but with the loss of the 1890 US federal census, the majority were found on the 1900 US census. The Census of Canada records were available. Many of the families traveling to Quebec are seen on the 1900 US census, which shows us that they didn't wait long in Canada and traveled on into the US. When scouring census records, the families had found employment in numerous fields. Many Eris families worked in the anthracite mines of Pennsylvania. A great number were working on the railroads, especially in Minnesota, Montana, and Wisconsin. Groups of families also went to the textile mills in Connecticut and Rhode Island, where work had been secured for them. Employment was also found in the glassworks in Bel Air, Ohio, known as Glass City. Of the families that settled in Wisconsin and Iowa, many appeared to be farming. In Massachusetts, especially Holyoke, families worked in the paper mills. Cleveland, Ohio, saw many Achill families working in the shipyards and iron foundries, where an Achill community was already established. It became apparent from the US Census records that wherever the families settled, there were other local Mayo families who had traveled out many years before. The families established their own communities, keeping traditions and language alive. As a result of the close-knit communities, many local families are laid to rest together in the same cemeteries in the US. The Find a Grave website is a very good resource. We travel back Blacksod Bay, 30th of March, 1883, and the families boarding the first sailing. SS Nestorian, last foot on Irish soil, first step on a life-changing journey, and their descendants are returning. Nestorian departed Blacksod Bay, 30th of March, 1883, and arrived at Boston the 15th of April, 1883. The families disembarked the next morning due to the late arrival of the ship. William Cawley, Rush County, Indiana, naturalization certificate stated that he emigrated, then disembarked at Ely Bay and arrived at Boston on the 15th day of April, 1883. Here we see William Cawley. The SS Nestorian manifest stated William and Annie Cawley family were ticketed to Rushville, Indiana. The Cawley family were from the Mullet Peninsula, and their descendants have returned. We see here Bridget Dixon family, Mullet to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, also on the Nestorian, and descendants are returning. We see descendants returning from Ohio. Peter and Mary Gorham family, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and descendant there is returning from New York. Honor Heveron family, Fallmore to Youngstown, Ohio, descendant returning from Michigan. Pat and Kath McManaman family, Glencastle, Lowell, Massachusetts, and descendants there are returning from Massachusetts and Virginia. And Geraghty family, Drum, Mullet Peninsula, Minnesota, and a descendant is returning from Minnesota. Ned and Bridget Lavelle family, Inver to Columbia County, Pennsylvania, descendant is returning from North Carolina, and another descendant is returning from New York. Anthony and Margaret Barrett family, Shra, Lackawanna, Pennsylvania, and a group of descendants returned from Chicago. We go on to the next sailing now of SS Canadian to Boston, 1883. Thomas and Bridget Donnelly family, Inishpiggle Island to Elroy, Wisconsin, and descendants are returning from Wisconsin, as we see there. SS Scandinavian to Quebec, 1883. Frank and Sarah Toher family from Tipaholosheen to Ontario, Canada. And we see their descendant returning from Toronto and also another descendant visiting from Toronto. Brian and Margaret McMahon family, Ackle Island, Cleveland, Ohio, also on the Scandinavian, and a descendant there is returning from Ohio. SS Phoenician, Boston, 1883. John and Kath Toher family from Tipaholosheen to Grosvenor, Connecticut. Descendants family was mentioned in the Tuke Report, 1883, referring to the arrival of SS Phoenician, featured in the Boston Daily Advertiser. And we see descendant returning from Massachusetts. Peter and Honor Murphy family from Curlick to Montana were also mentioned in the Tuke Report regarding the Boston Daily Advertiser. The Murphy family were traveling that were referred to as the Montana-bound family that were traveling to Montana, with also other local families. SS Manitoban to Quebec, 1883. William and Mary Hopkins family, Archie Connon, Mullet to Wolfe Island, Ontario, and descendants returning from Pennsylvania. SS Prussian to Boston, 1883. Peter and Rose McAndrew family, Glencastle to Baldwin, Wisconsin. Descendant is returning there from Colorado. SS Canadian to Quebec, 1883. Pat and Mary Lavelle family, Devlon, Mullet Peninsula to Allegheny, Pennsylvania. And descendants are returning from Pennsylvania there, and they're actually in the Heritage Center, as most of the descendants would come back to the Heritage Center. SS Austrian, Anthony and Mary Kennedy family from Cross Mullet Peninsula to Wisconsin, and we see their descendants returning from Minnesota. Also on the Austrian, SS Austrian, Dennis and Mary Ginley family, Moyrahan to St. Paul, Minnesota, and their descendants are returning from Minnesota. Also on board SS Austrian was Michael and Anna Barrett family from Lame, Mullet Peninsula, going to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is a beautiful photograph of Michael and Anna and the family. Michael Barrett Jr.'s descendants returning from Colorado. And also Sarah Barrett's descendant returning from Minnesota. And descendants returning from Minnesota and Oregon of Anthony Barrett, who was actually born in Minnesota. The SS Grecian to Quebec, 1883, John and Margaret Tollett family, Talabel Mullet to Pennsylvania. And as you can see there, Annie was actually born on the voyage, and descendants of John and Margaret returning from Massachusetts. They've been back to visit. SS Buenos-Aires to Quebec, 1883, Patrick Sweeney family from Atchewalla, Bangor Eris to Chicago, Illinois. Descendants returning from Virginia and Florida, also descendants from Michigan. SS Waldensian to Boston, 1883, James and Mary Linshuren family, COREAN Peninsula, Ackle to Cleveland, Ohio, descendants returning from North Carolina. And also on board SS Waldensian was Pat and Kath Monaghan family from Layham, Mullet Peninsula to Warren, Rhode Island. Descendants returning from Massachusetts there. Also on board SS Waldensian, Philip and Mary Heverin family, Duloch to Warren, Rhode Island. So both families were traveling to Rhode Island and boarded at Blacksod as well. And a descendant there is returning from Washington State. SS Canadian to Boston, 1884. These are the 1884 sailings now. Edward and Bridget Dane family, Ballycroy to Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the descendant is returning from West Virginia. Another family on board SS Canadian was Dominic and Bridget Barrett family, Barhove, Belmullet Peninsula to Delaware, Ohio. And descendants are returning from Washington, D.C. and returning from Arizona. SS Phoenician to Boston, 1884. James and Ellen Cormick Corristine O'Malley family, Duloch to Warren, Rhode Island. And we have a descendant returning from California. SS Corean to Quebec, 1884. Pat and Ann Monaghan family, Ohadoon to Livingston, Montana, and we see their descendants returning from Montana and also from Washington State. And the last sailing, SS Prussian to Boston, 1884, Anthony and Ellen Noon family, Talabelle Mullet to Warren, Rhode Island. And we see their descendant returning from Massachusetts. Black Sod Memorial Garden. What initially was going to be a small commemorative plaque at Ellie Bay developed into a memorial garden at Black Sod near the lighthouse. Black Sod Memorial Garden and Black Sod Bay Immigration are dedicated to the memory of the families who left these shores in 1883, 1884, assisted by the Tuke Fund. And here we have signage in the memorial garden. Over 200 direct descendants have returned from the United States and Canada to Black Sod Bay. The descendants have connections with over 1,500 passengers, records researched for approximately 2,800 persons, many messages sent to descendants and waiting to hear back. It's a privilege to say that for each of the 15 sailings that left from Black Sod Bay, descendants have physically returned to their ancestral home. As the Ackle families also boarded the same sailings at Black Sod, we contacted descendants of those families, many of whom settled in Cleveland. After the launch of the website, we wanted others to know of the assisted emigration and shared this information with well-respected Cleveland historian Margaret Lynch. We wanted to help all descendants. Later in 2013, it was such a privilege when Professor Christine Keneally visited the Heritage Centre with Dr. Gerard Moran to see the work we had carried out in Ockley and Black Sod. The Mayo Tuke emigrants were part of an even bigger picture. In 2014, we met up with Clifton and Uachtarad representatives and discussed remembering the County Galway families also. Descendants are still making contact, some through the main website and Heritage Centre, others replying to ancestry messages. Those who have made contact are relaying the information to others. There are many inquiries on Facebook groups that lead to Black Sod Bay immigration. Descendants were due to travel back in 2020 and 2021. Naturally, because of the pandemic, this didn't happen. It's always such a privilege and humbling to welcome back descendants of the families who made those life-changing journeys in 1883 and 1884 back to their ancestral home. Eamon, a local man, visited the grave of James Hack Tuke in Hitchin, Hertfordshire, England. Thank you, Mr. Tuke. A sentiment expressed by descendants, many of whom had no idea of the assisted emigration scheme or that families travelled together as a community. James Hack Tuke helped the families of Mayo and Galway in 1882, 1884. Through the comprehensive, well-documented and structured Tuke report, he is now helping descendants find their way back. This time, the descendants of those courageous families are on their own voyage of discovery. In the springtime of 1883 and 1884, over 3,300 people, families of Erris, Ackle and Newport West, County Mayo, emigrated on 15 sailings directly from Black Sod Bay to the US and Canada. Their descendants are once again part of our community, and together we remember them. Thank you.